Well, hello, Talent Warriors. This is George Randle and my co-host partner in all things talent, Mr. Tom Lokar, PhD in all things talent. And today is our inaugural episode, and we will be answering the question, why should you continue to listen about talent? So stay tuned as we start our very first podcast to discuss all things leadership, executive coaching, talent advisory, executive search, how to build elite teams and win in your space. And as always, this episode is sponsored by the Talent War Group, an executive search firm and talent advisory. We deliver talent solutions to business problems. So to learn more, visit talentwargroup.com. Hello, Tom. So I know the first question I have is who is Tom Lokar, PhD?
Currently, I'm a CHRO at a healthcare company here in Plano, Texas, as well as a partner and co-contributor with the Talent War Group. So I'm moonlighting, don't tell my boss.
Is that Carly or your wife? We now each have two, I think.
I was thinking my CEO here. At my regular job, but don't ever tell my wife anything.
Oh, I promise.
Kathy, I'm joking. Not that you'll ever listen. And yes, tell Carly everything, because I feel like she is the only one that covers our rear end there at the office. So, George, I don't know if there's a whole lot to talk about that isn't already on LinkedIn and people could Google, but for the most part, I'm a senior level HR advisor who really loves the opportunity to develop people, develop leaders. I got my PhD in IO psychology because I believed that the leadership quotient was the most important thing I could study or pay attention to. And the most I thought at the time, this is late 80s, early 90s when I was in undergrad and grad school, that leadership was the most important lever I could learn to pull as a business executive. And I didn't see myself as a straight line business executive. I wanted to pursue this dream of developing leaders, and I didn't know what a talent mindset was. I didn't know that there was a talent war, and I really naively didn't even know how important leadership was to organizational effectiveness, culture, business results. It just intrigued me as a psychological principle. How does someone become a leader? How does someone grow as a leader? And interestingly enough, we were having this discussion just today as a senior team at work around, investing more in the development of leaders, because as you know, George, in most companies, in most functions, the best individual contributors get promoted to management.
Yes.
Well, is that because they're innately ready to be leaders? Is that because that you're born with some sort of leadership gene? We can go into way more detail in this when we go into your background and your co-author's background, Mike Sorelli, but I don't believe that. I think assertiveness and drive for results, some of that type A personality propels certain people into leadership roles faster than others, but I don't think that makes you a great leader because you had that. I don't think you know anything about leadership because you sell more, engineer better, or think faster. I think it's a whole different set of muscles that you have to develop, and I think you have to continuously develop. If leaders were born versus developed, you and I would probably be better husbands than we are. You could say everything's innate then, but I really believe that it has to be attended to, and now 30 years later, as a head of talent, a chief learning officer, a business consultant, a management consultant, 3-time now CHRO, I'm more and more invested in the leadership quotient than I've ever been. It's what sort of got me back into consulting in between my CHRO gigs and then working with you and the folks at the Talent War Group to launch our firm. Was there's still a fundamental, I guess, I don't want to put down every Fortune 1000 or Russell 2000 company. There's still a fundamental lack of patience, I'll call it, with developing leaders.
Oh, yeah. It drives me nuts that people don't invest more and aren't focused on that. And I thought it was an anomaly at my first company. And then I saw it over and over and over and over again. And I was just like, wow, this is a much bigger problem than I thought.
Anyway, and that was a quick review of, who I am and why I'm here today. I don't know if there's anything else in my backstory, but father of 5 adults now, 14 to 23, in college or out of college. One of my daughters has just been promoted to HR business partner at Amazon a year out of school. She's in that massive company churning along. Pretty proud of her and really excited about this new opportunity with this new company as the head of HR, but still super passionate about not just talking to people like you and I are going to do with this podcast about leadership and organization effectiveness. I'm still interested in doing the work. I feel like, I don't know about you, George. I think you agree. I feel like we're at the sunrise of our careers, where experience, wisdom, and the right amount of perspective is at our fingertips to apply to these business solutions that our clients are looking for. And people are going to hear in this podcast our passion, and they're going to hear some really direct and clear thinking on leadership and talent, whether it's acquisition, development, putting it and making it work within a culture and in an organizational system. And they're going to hear a lot of straight talk. They're not going to hear, even though you did write a very well-written and well-received business book, they're not going to hear a lot of business book speak from the two of us. And the guests we're going to have on, I don't think they're not going to get a lot of management BS. It's going to be really us talking real talk with real leaders from all walks of life about leadership, talent, organization effectiveness.
Yeah, I'd say this is kind of going to be, or what my hopes are for the younger folks listening, the original Wizard of Oz, when they pulled back the curtain on who was really operating the world, and you get to see the real inside of HR.
Yeah.
And hopefully, there's a lot of people out there that are listening or that will listen and understand that there's an even greater value for the human capital specialists out there, those leadership development, those executive coaches. So yeah, I'm absolutely super passionate, but I am one of those people, obviously the co-author of The Talent War, How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent, and seems to be doing pretty good out in Amazon and wherever books are sold, as well as Kindle and audiobooks.
Because I remember the one podcast, our practice podcast, where I asked you about your backstory and then we got into podcasting. So before we get into more content, let's let our wide listening audience hear a little bit about your backstory, because honestly, I think it's more interesting in that you served, and we all thank you for that. Mike, Carly, the entire team served, but how you got to where you are today, pretty humble beginnings in the Midwest, is, I think, a really fascinating story, and how you became passionate about this topic of leadership, talent, organization. It probably goes more to who you are as a person and not just who you are as an executive. So I think people will be interested in hearing it. So how did you get here, George? Where did you start? What was that beginning that got you down this path?
Well, there's so many ways to start that, but you're right. I did serve, Midwest, middle class dad, a truck driver, mom, a social worker. I knew that, they wanted me to go to college. I had to go to college. No way to pay for college. So back in the day, this is pre-global war on terror. I saw, that be all you can be. And I was sold. And so I enlisted in the U.S. Army in the reserves, learned a ton really, really, really quickly, but had a very colorful tongue, colorful mouth. And I remember two non-commissioned officers saying to me, well, Randle, if you think you're so damn smart, why don't you go be one of them there officers? And we were in the Ozarks. That's where the accent's supposed to come from. It's not designed as derogatory, but two good old boy rednecks that said, hey, go be an officer. So I kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, how hard could it be? So commissioned through ROTC, I served about 8 years active duty, won the lottery. As I say, there was a drunk assignments officer that put my name on a dart, threw it over his shoulder, hit the globe, and I went to Berlin in 1989. So, living 4 blocks from what people would call the Berlin Wall, but it's actually the Berlin Fence. The wall only goes from the east. It separates the two cities, East Berlin, West Berlin, but the fence goes around the rest. And got to retire Allied Checkpoint Charlie, do a deployment, Kenya, Somalia, came back, went through schools, commanded, just really, really loved it, and realized that I was in the world's greatest leadership incubator. Now, I can say that now, but didn't necessarily know that I was living in that fishbowl at the time. Mm-hmm. But after I got done commanding, I always liked being with troops. I liked building those teams. I liked going out to the field. I liked deploying. enjoyed a lot of it. We won't go into the bad parts of deployments, but
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought, well, I've had enough of deployments. Hey, I'm going to get out. So I go through this veterans firm, don't know what I don't know. I land with this marquee company. We wrote about it in the book, but we'll get to the book in a minute. And wow, wrong person, wrong job, bad fit. I mean, I got promoted. I did really, really well. Big box retailer on the logistics side. And just to kind of cut the story short, I just realized that was all about management. It was all about turning the cranks. How many binders at the time could you fill with policy manuals and how are you adhering to that? And I was very fortunate that I got a crack to join a consulting firm. I was in the defense contracting space, but it sounded really sexy at the time. Hey, I'm a senior consultant. I'm a consulting manager. But things aren't always what they seem, and I liked it. But I went through this life event, and I guess I should just be straightforward with everybody. Went through a divorce, and I needed to make sure that I was in the same city with my kids. So the only job that I could get was in human resources. And so I took a few steps back and fell into it. And I'm like, well, look, whatever I got to do to be with my kids. So there was never really a passion there. But about 3 or 4 months into the gig, they said, hey, you can lead. And I said, well, yeah, I've done my fair share of that. So the next thing you know, they start giving me HR business partners. They start giving me resource managers. They start giving me recruiters, and I'm off and running. And it was about that time that I realized I could do this not only really, really well, but having understood the business side of the equation, that I wasn't somebody turning the cranks. I wasn't just another HR operational person where people throw things over the fence, you catch them, you deliver. I actually wanted to make life easier. And then I was like, finally made the connection that it was about building elite teams. So I spent 20 plus years building, recruiting teams and rather large ones. And then when you and I came together at HP, I mean, at any given moment, I couldn't tell you how many recruiters I had across the 3 regions. But, in the 3 or 5 years when I headed up global recruiting, I think we hired 75,000 people.
I know that's true. And I know it sounds unbelievable to people, but at the time, HP was one company. It was over 350,000 people worldwide in every country of the globe. And I managed a portion of it that was somewhere between 45 and 55,000 people, depending on which portion, whether I had ITO or the apps BPO job, 10 to 17 billion in revenue. And I know, George, you hired that many because I know in my 5 years at HP, I probably let go through best shoring, which is the process of workforce planning your high cost people out of the US and Europe into lower cost Asia and South America. I probably best shored 25 to 30,000 jobs and rehired the same amount in other countries. And that was your staffing team that was doing it. And you weren't doing that just for me because you had moved up to the enterprise services role, the larger business unit that I was a part of. The scale at that time at an HP and an IBM is just so mind-boggling that people think we're bullshitting them, but that's what it was. You can look back at the statistics, but what a great learning experience to do HR at scale, wasn't it?
It was. And I don't know if I ever told you the story, but I got brought down to, they had this America's HR meeting, and Tracy Keogh, the CHRO, and Caroline Atherton and LCO Barcelos and a bunch of other people were all down there, and they were asking for suggestions. And I think I was probably 3 glasses of wine into the cocktail hour. So I wasn't gauging my audience. I remember it was like year 2. They were giving me some award for America's Best Staffing Team. And I said, George, what would you do to improve this operation? And I said, well, you really should have one throat to choke. I said, leaders like you, Tom, you got to go to 3 or 4 or 5 different people, depending on what region or sub-region you're recruiting in. I said, so put it on one person's shoulders. I thought when I offered that up that it would, A, was a brilliant suggestion, but B, that they would beta test that in a smaller business unit in HP.
No way in hell they'd ask you to do it.
Yeah, I didn't think I was killing myself right there. And then all of a sudden, it's like at the end of the week, Mike Dallas comes back and Caroline and Gemma Johns, actually, I think was the head of TA at the time.
Yeah.
And she said, we really liked your idea and we're going to beta test it and we're going to put you in the role. And in my head, I'm thinking there are 125,000 people in enterprise services. And I just absolutely defined the word masochism in that moment. And so it's like, okay. I mean, they certainly gave me some money to go with it, but that's where I got to impact at scale But also for those people listening, that's where I got to, meet Tom and be influenced on the HR side about the true value that the talent acquisition that HR can bring to the table. Stayed with HP for a long time. We'll cut the story short because it's not super interesting, but a couple other VP jobs. And then I ran into Mike Sorelli, listened to him on a Jocko podcast of all things, and became a strategic advisor for what was EF Overwatch. And during a commercial break, he calls me up and says, hey, I think we have enough for a book here. And so that's really where the talent war came together.
So let me guide you through this part, because if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Because I think it helps frame it. So you and Mike meet. I think you became workout buddies too over at Lifetime Fitness because you're both jacked up. You two come together and, different backgrounds. He grew up in Northern California. Dad was a marketing consultant, ran a very successful business, entrepreneur. Mike enlisted. We'll have him on to tell a story, so I won't ruin it. But you two come together and you have this single-minded focus talent. His coming from special operations and what he did after he left, regular service and SEAL teams and moved into a specialty role. You, in your Force Point head of talent acquisition role, come together and you write this book called The Talent War. Why did you write the book? What were you hoping to communicate? I don't think you wrote it to start a consulting firm. So let's go to the real, just heart of the book, what it's about, why you wrote it, and what you hope to communicate.
See, you've always asked me good questions. You're on a run here, Tom. This is good. All the way back, years back.
I'm going to go get a Coke while you're talking.
What we figured out, we kind of started with the premise. Mike had already started a not-for-profit firm called Vetted. And then he changes it to EF Overwatch when he starts working with Echelon Front. And he got to see firsthand how challenged any number of firms were when it came to building elite teams. And so Mike, coming from arguably the place that does it better than anybody else in the entire world, the U.S. Special Operations Command, JSOC specifically for Mike, we knew we had something. So between his seeing the absolute best way that you could build elite teams and my 20 plus years of seeing companies do it sometimes spectacularly correct, some companies doing it wrong, what we thought is that we would combine the best of special operations and the lessons learned from the corporate world on how to hire the best. But, along the way, one of the things that we came into, she asked us kind of what the purpose was. Yeah, it wasn't to build a firm. We didn't have any idea about that. But it was, what could great organizations learn? What could companies learn and challenge companies about the value of talent? And then it kind of spread into the HR side. And we were like, well, we kind of realized that one of the challenges was you being an exception to the rule, and why we absolutely needed you to contribute to the book was there's so many people that just didn't get HR, let alone how to actually look at talent the right way. And so we were off and running. Our biggest challenge was don't boil the ocean, which we did our level best to do.
Right. So I might mix questions here, but the two questions I want to ask is, how is the book received from a content standpoint? And what have been some of the reactions that you've gotten from folks? And anything surprise you about, when you put something out in the universe that's yours, which I really admire you and Mike doing that, you have no idea what's going to come back. So what's the reception? And what I'm getting to is, did your message come across the way you thought it would, or did people take it in a different way? What's been some of the reactions and surprises to the content?
From the business groups and business leaders, it's generally been positive, like, hey, these guys know what they're talking about. I think we both bring a lot of credibility to the table. And one of the things that we were adamant about is making sure people understand that we weren't preaching, that there were any number of mistakes that we both made along the way. The HR and talent acquisition community, we're seeing people that go, thank God somebody finally established the basics, because so many people, think of HR or talent acquisition, recruiting, staffing, whatever term you want to put on it, is so basic. So the response, but other than that, it was a great reception. I think the biggest challenge for us was boiling it down to the basics, where people could pick it up and go, okay, it's not a YouTube video. It's not a how-to guide. These are the principles of doing it. if you apply these principles, you'll do better, but we're not giving you the magic question, the magic process, the magic flow chart or org chart. So I was really, really surprised because you're right. I was expecting to get creamed and everybody to jump in and go.
But on some level, when I think you and Mike have talked about this, you could have easily done a field guide from that content and given people a 20-pager, at least on the talent acquisition piece. I want to come back to the HR piece of the book and just talk a little bit about HR transformation with you, maybe where HR is a business function at this point in time. But don't you think you could have easily translated that into a field guide and a bit more of a formula of how to, assuming that people read the principles correctly, interpreted them the correct way?
Yeah, and I think that's something we may do in the future. One of the biggest challenges, when you go through, they give you this list of like 50 questions and before you even start writing the book, and they're like, who's your target audience? So we had to determine that. But the reason we really didn't go to the field guide was because there's so many permutations. A company structure of some people don't even have an HR function, but they could use this guide. So we wanted to appeal to the largest population possible. And we thought the more specific we would get. But we are thinking about doing one, especially, because the reverse of the equation, we were thinking about doing a field manual to help veterans transition because the stuff that's out there for veterans is
abysmal.
Yeah, that's a very good word. Thank you for keeping me from saying something that needed to be edited out.
Yes, our forgotten service members, even though we see them in the airport and we see them on the airplane and we say, thank you for your service. It's kind of like homeless people. We move on past them. We don't think about them again after that. We don't pay enough attention to the sacrifice they made and what they need to come back into society. Because until you've walked in those shoes, I have a brother who served, and I don't think he suffered PTSD, but I know that coming back from the military into the regular world, to this day, he's in his 60s. Still, it was tough on him. So before I jump to the HR thing, I'm going to put a pin in that. If I heard you correctly, one of the things you and Mike feel like you really got correct with the book was you brought some things back to the basics. And look, we could talk forever, and maybe this will be our target audience, since it's certainly been the target audience that's reached out to us. I'm amazed at how many small, medium business owners have taken to this book and taken to the concept. They don't have the huge HR department, so they may not have any HR department, and they can't afford McKinsey or Bain or Korn Ferry or Russell Reynolds to come in and consult to them. And they've dug into this book and they see sort of the pragmatic things that they could use in their business. And for our listening audience, it's sort of how we came about starting a consulting firm, is we realized there's this segment of business owners and business people who have vibrant organizations with leaders in them and all the talent challenges of an HP, but at a much smaller scale. And they're just looking for ways to put some of the talent work concepts in place for them, as well as additional things that you and I and Mike and the other members of the team bring to the table. But before we move on from the book, anything you and Mike feel like you got wrong or missed that you wish were in this book?
By the end of writing the book and doing the audiobook, you've edited and re-edited so many times you come to hate your own book. I think with some things, where we could have done a little bit better job, if I were to pick and choose, I probably would have hammered down, and I know we're going to get to this part, I would have hammered down on the C-suite a whole lot more, that it being a leadership responsibility. The foreword of the book was really written by Jocko, and he talks about that building a team is a subset of leadership. And I think we probably could have hit that a whole lot harder. Because to your point, these small companies that are coming to us, you and I hired tens of thousands at HP, and there's mistakes that are going to come in numbers like that. But it's like a drop of water in the ocean. That mistake is not catastrophic, but to a small, vibrant business, you get the wrong person, you can do enormous, if not irreparable damage to your brand, your finances, your customers. So we really probably could have just hammered a little bit harder on the leadership side of the equation about how it's more their responsibility to drive and pull this thing together.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you, although I think the book has enough hints toward that direction, but you probably could have done a whole chapter on it. And who knows, George, maybe we'll do a whole book on it. I don't know.
Maybe there's another book in the making.
Maybe there is.
We'll see.
So, well, we're just going to continue on with Tom interviewing George because I think you're a more interesting guest than me, and I'm a decent interviewer. But I think this one we can talk about forever, but we won't keep our audience that long. So, you just left a company, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were there for 5 years.
Yeah, 3 on the nose this go round.
Okay, and you went through an entire transition with them. 2 different heads of HR. Maybe the same CEO, but definitely changes at the top leadership team. You built out a whole new team. The head of HR put in a whole new set of systems and programs globally for that company. I went through the same thing a couple of years back with Mitel. I was with them for 6 years. We went private, public, private, and I had to reinvent HR for a 45-year-old company. And it felt like a lot of what I was doing was transforming HR while we were delivering services, buying companies, integrating employees, improving the revenue per employee, improving engagement, all those things. I look back and I look where I am today, and I think you might do the same thing and ask yourself, where is HR right now as a function? What is the state of HR? Is HR transformation done? Did everyone punch their ticket and they've all moved into this new model of business partnering and seat at the table and trusted advisor and business person? My favorite is business person first, HR is my major.
Oh, wow. Hadn't heard that one yet.
Really? You haven't interviewed HR people, I guess, in a while. The fact of the matter is, it should be true, but it's become such a cliche on resumes and LinkedIn that sometimes I just sort of roll my eyes and gag because I would love to test those people through their P&L, their balance sheet, and just say, okay, well, show me where you're at cash flow Q2.
Oh, yeah. You're going to get a deer in the headlights look just about every time.
But at the same token, and I hope they become our audience members, I know a ton of HR people that are incredibly astute from a business perspective and a P&L perspective, but they've totally forgotten about the softer side. They were so busy becoming business partners, they forgot that there's human beings on the shop floor that need care and reinforcement and a sense of worth and value as part of the company versus sort of what we experience at HP, where when you're dealing with those kinds of numbers, you're dealing with those kinds of numbers. You stop thinking about them as people. I would say, George, 90% of the people you hired and 90% of the people I let go, I never saw face to face.
Oh, easy. Yeah, I would say the percentage is a little bit higher. And so many people knew because I was signing the offer letters. That's how they knew who I was.
Right.
But we hired in 90 countries?
Where do you think HR is today? What's your perspective right now in terms of the function and where it's at?
Yeah, I think I'm a skeptic by nature. I don't think we have enough HR practitioners that are students of the business. My experience has been is that the balance has been on the operational and the compliance side versus really striving to achieve the balance that you just talked about between being a student of the business, understanding the pain points, understanding the P&L or the CapEx and the OpEx of any particular business unit and managing the care and feeding. I don't think we have enough practitioners that are doing that. It's like we don't always want to refer to the book, but
hey, we got one podcast to sell the shit out of this book. We're not going to talk about it again until we have Sorelli on, and then we'll have to talk about it again, but go.
Yeah, but Tracy Keough said it best. HR isn't just at the table. We are the table. And we need senior leadership to be forcing that. But we also need that HR side to strike that balance between the gateway to every human capital issue, which is everything in your company, but understanding that the people that are in those business units, they have massive responsibilities that HR has to understand, because otherwise it's like two ships passing in the night. And I actually have seen that more often than not. You've got a business leader talking about the things that they're about to approach in their quarterly business review or end of month or end of quarter close, and an HR executive screaming right by talking about people issues, and those two issues are never intertwined. So I'm skeptical. I mean, I've seen plenty of people that are doing it like rock stars that have that balance, but not enough. Not enough.
Yeah, I think where I'm at, and of course, I'm at a small company that's on a growth curve. It's sort of a start around. 10 years ago, it was a startup, and then it struggled, and now it's been turned around by a really effective CEO and a leadership team. In fact, George, I think this is the first time in my career I'm working for a CEO who leads with EQ over IQ, and yet the guy is unbelievably smart.
Mm-hmm.
He's fond of saying he's not the longest French fry in the Happy Meal, but honestly, actually he is. But he starts with EQ and empathy, and maybe that's because we're in behavioral health, but he hasn't always been in behavioral health. The whole team is that way, and they're very driven and effective, successful executives. So this is one where I'm still sort of getting my head around, what the HR levers are that we need to pull. But in the broader sense, as I was sort of roaming around the last 2 years since leaving Mitel and consulting and the work that we've been doing to get the business off the ground and working with some clients, corporate HR almost has a set playbook now of there's a head of HR, there's some COE leaders, there's business partners. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of companies have pivoted back to make sure employee relations and field HR is well taken care of. I think we got it way too much to the 1-800 call HR. And manager and employee self-service, maybe we went a little too far, the care and feeding
I'd agree.
Of people. Your HR function is only good as your payroll system. If you don't pay on the 15th and 30th or 31st of every month, and that person's paycheck goes direct deposit to their mortgage or their car payment, you've ruined their life. So it's my way of saying you got to be really good at the basics to get moving up Maslow's hierarchy to leadership development and organizational change and building culture. But I'm optimistic that the function is when you get out of the big corporate level and you get into smaller companies like the ones we're starting to talk with, they don't have a preconceived notion of the old HR or the behemoth HR where you have to have COEs, HR business partners, and field HR. They're looking at just practical people solutions. And I think there's a place where in the SMB market, small, medium business market, which I don't know what that is. I mean, in my old days, that was a company that was 100 million or less, maybe 5,000 employees. You're seeing executive teams wanting more from their HR person on the talent side and the culture side because they know they can get the blocking and tackling done through other means, through contract resources or through their HRS system or some other provider. They're really looking for the talent and culture council that they need to build the kind of company they want to build. So, to me, the state of HR, I think we're in a much better place. We're much more at the table. I think some of the big companies we should probably have a podcast on this because I know we're running out of time. We should have a podcast on maybe what's happening in corporations around talent and some of these topics that have popped up over the past couple of years and how corporate HR and C teams are dealing with some of these issues and really being influenced as much by their strategy as they are by society and changes happening in society.
Yeah, I was just reading that article that you shared that line is getting far more blurry between the community and businesses. So I think we're going to add a few what could be potentially controversial topics in HR. But since it's people, it's always everything. I think some of the most dynamic and best leaders that I've run into have actually come out of HR. And I'm skeptical of what's in place now, but I'm optimistic. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for, as you asked me the question when we went back to the book, we hope we do help people get it right on the small to medium business company side, because it sets the trajectory of where you're going to go and when you get it right. But you do have to do the blocking and the tackling. You can't ignore that. And, frankly, I don't know if you feel this. I think you do feel this way. It has been the most all-consuming job to be on an HR executive leadership team with all that's coming at you at any given time. It's made me a better business practitioner. It's made me a better people practitioner. It's made me pay attention to systems, to programs, to absorption rates, and be very mindful of everything that fits into the business ecosystem. And I wouldn't change, the way that I went for anything in the world, because despite the masochistic side of being in HR and how much punishment you can take on any given week if you get a fire drill, it's been the best career choice that I've ever made.
Well, look, I know here in Dallas, Jamba Juice here is headquartered here in Frisco, Plano area. Their current CEO is their former CHRO. I have no doubt that Tracy Keogh or a Patty McCord or you name the name brand CHRO could become a CEO at this point. They've got all of the DNA around leadership, people, and culture. And then you don't survive at that level, reporting to that level of a board at HP and not know your way around a balance sheet and a P&L. So, I think the function, as it attracts more business-oriented people, and those people are successful, you're going to see more and more heads of HR become CEOs. And let's face it, with a drive for diversity and inclusion at the top of the house, 60% of our profession is female. That gives a lot of opportunity for women to move into the C-suite and across the C-suite and maybe even up to the top job if they have the interest to do it. So look, we're sort of at our time. We told the audience, we first told them we're the Talent War podcast. The next thing and final thing we're going to tell them is, what are we going to be about over the coming weeks, months? How is this going to work? And what do they have to look forward to?
For me, I think what people have to look forward to with us is that you're going to see the real side of the human capital equation and how it influences business and how you can, regardless of whether you're an HR practitioner or you're on the business leadership side or you're a hiring manager or somebody aspiring to get into management, it's truly my hope that this changes how you look at the investment, the time, the mentorship, the coaching, the focus and discipline and rigor that you put on your human capital.
Yep. And I think also with that in mind, George, people are going to be introduced to some really fascinating guests. It's not going to be just you and I playing catchball all day. That may be a portion of it, but our hope is that we bring some of the best minds, not just in HR, but in business and leadership to our podcast to talk about their views on these topics we've mentioned thus far. Maybe even swerve off into other topics, because these business people that I know we have listed for future podcasts are really fascinating all around people. And I think the fun part of doing this, not just talking about talent, culture, and leadership, is just seeing how, if you're a young person listening in or you're new in your career, you're going to get a lot of great career advice extemporaneously through listening to these people's backstory, how they got where they got, and why they formed the notions around talent and leadership and organization or business that they have. And I think that's going to be a really powerful part of the coming podcast. So I'm looking forward to it, George.
Yeah, I think there's a great list of people, authors, CHROs, CEOs, COOs. I know that we're going to have one specific guest that's in the NFL and in charge of player development. So we're going to hit it from all sides. So, folks, we want to certainly thank you for listening to the Talent War podcast, where we're going to discuss all things talent, focusing on the talent mindset, the core belief that the only true competitive advantage you can hope to achieve and maintain really is your talent. And thank you for listening to the Talent War podcast, where we discuss all things talent, focusing on having a true talent mindset, which is the core belief the only true competitive advantage you can hope to achieve and maintain is your talent. Join us for the next episode of the Talent War podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you download your podcasts. If you like what you heard, subscribe, and please leave us a kind review. Do connect with Mr. Dr. Tom Lokar and myself, George Randle, on the Talent War Group's LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram account. And by all means, send your comments, inquiries, and any ideas for controversial talent, HR-related topics to media@talentwargroup.com. The Talent War podcast is brought to you by the Talent War Group, an executive search and advisory firm with services like talent acquisition, leadership development, seminars, executive coaching. Basically, we work with you to bring talent solutions to business problems. And to get started, visit us at talentwargroup.com.